Hey everyone! Now that 2013 is coming to a close, I want to talk about the year in review and let you know my reading goals for next year. Now, I did look over the books that I read this year and came up with a couple of stats, so I just want to share them with you. And I just have my tablet down here as a reference, so that's why I'm looking down. First of all, I read 70% adult fiction and 24% young adult, with the remaining, I think it was 6%, being children's literature. And I'm pretty happy with those statistics. I definitely preferred to read adult, but I don't regret the young adult books I read this year. I read a book by John Green, I read a couple by Rainbow Rowell, and I'm really happy that I read all those, so I have no regrets on how I split up my reading in that way. However, in terms of the ethnicity of the authors, I'm thinking in reference to the video that Rincey Reeds did this year about diversity in reading. I didn't do so well. At the end of the year, 94% of the authors I read were white. So I could probably do a lot better on that front. So as a small resolution for next year, I would like to improve that. However, it's not a main resolution, so it's probably not the one I'll focus on the most, but I definitely would like to improve that. As well, I noted that of the authors I read, 70% of them were American. And in contrast, only 6% of the books I read were by Canadian authors. I would like to improve that just because I am Canadian. Certainly there's nothing wrong with being an American author, but as a Canadian, if I'm not reading my own books, kind of who will? Now, in terms of genre, I looked at the genres that I read the most. So 17% of the books I read fell into the chick lit / romance category, and the other 17% fell into contemporary, and 15% of them were considered to be fantasy. And I can see why I read a lot of those. However, I looked and I realized that I didn't read a single historical fiction book this year, and I really wanted to get into that genre. So I'm disappointed about that. I also only read 4% literary fiction, 6% classics, and 6% science fiction. So one of my goals this year is I would like to round out my reading of genres a little bit more. I'd like to read more science fiction, more classics, more literary books, and I'd like to read at least one historical book, hopefully more. Just because I love reading different types of books. And as a secondary resolution regarding genres, I would like to read books that have more substance, particularly focusing on books in the literature genre. I'll, continue to read more classics and books that just have, themes and meanings, and just the books that you remember years afterwards. When I went to compile my list of the top 10 books that I read this year, it really surprised me. Although there was a lot of books that I enjoyed reading, I realized that the books that I remembered and was thinking about months after I read them were the books that were, maybe took a little bit longer to read, maybe had a bit more difficult writing style in them, maybe, they were a bit more challenging, but the challenge ended up always being worth it. So I really want to push myself to read those more substantial books. That being said, I'm sure I'm still going to read some light books along the way. It's good to mix things up and have some, chick lit and all of that. So I won't stop altogether, but I do want to remind myself how rewarding it is when I read those really good books, and the ones that are just, you feel so proud of yourself for having read. I am still a day away from the end of the year, but I believe I'm going to have read 55 books. I wasn't too concerned about the number of books I read just because I set my Goodreads goal at a very unambitious 30 books, so I've well passed that long ago. However, I am of course thinking about next year, and I've decided I'm a little apprehensive about it, but I'd like to do 60 books next year, and that would work out to 5 books a month. I think it's manageable, especially because I've become more interested in manga and graphic novels, which obviously are a lot quicker to read. But again, a little nervous because it is 5 more books than I read this year, but I think that's possible if I keep reading as much as I have, and definitely since I've started BookTube, I've read a lot more than I used to. So I think it's attainable. I'm holding on to that. Now finally, for my last main resolution, I intend to read big books next year. And specifically what I'm talking about are books that are maybe over 500 pages, or at that length where you almost think twice before reading them because you know it's going to take a long time and it will cut into your time reading other books. But as I looked through my Goodreads account, there were a lot of books that I have on there that are longer, but I really want to read, so I'm making this resolution so I don't feel guilty about having these larger books that might slow down my reading progress a little bit, but I think are worth it. No surprise, those big books are going to include the Song of Ice and Fire series. I need to read books 3, 4, and 5, so I'd love to get that done this year. Also want to start other series. For instance, I'd love to try The Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. And this is of course historical fiction, which would work well with my genres. As well, I might try reading The Other Boleyn Girl by Philippa Gregory. I also want to read The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rufus, if I'm saying that somewhat right. And also I'm extremely interested in reading Night Film by Marisha Pessl, which is I think like 600 pages, so not the largest book on this list, but still quite substantial. Of course, this isn't an exhaustive list, but just some of the books offhand that I know are larger that I really want to get to next year. Let me know, what are your resolutions for next year? Are there any larger books that I should be adding to my list? And yes, I'm just so excited for next year. Hope everyone's having a good one. I'll talk to you later. Okay, bye.